Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Thursday, February 13th, 2020. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And writers Hoai-Tran
Hey, everyone.
and Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Brad is not here today. I am recovering from a cold, which you can probably hear in my voice a little bit. This week is Valentine's Day. Tomorrow's Valentine's Day. Does anybody here have anything exciting planned for Valentine's Day?
Well, I was going to see Fantasy Island with my wife, but no draft houses in Austin are playing it. Only like the AMCs, so we're no longer seeing Fantasy Island for Valentine's Day. We're going to stay home and watch movies on our couch.
I know that you love the Alamo Draft House, Jacob, but like so much so that if the movie's not playing there, you won't see it?
We were very picky about it, and seeing a horror movie on opening day in a non-draft house is a nightmare, so no thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like no other Valentine's Day plans here at Slash Film headquarters. Let's move on. Let's talk about what we've been doing. This past couple weeks, I've been playing a lot with film lighting because I bought some film lights to. I have my condo is a rather like large like 2-story like loft, and it's rather, just like this huge room, which doesn't do well for lighting. It does not do well for audio, which is why I'm recording in my closet on this podcast. And I've been trying to find ways of lighting this properly. So we sometimes do unboxing videos on Ordinary Adventures. And I was going to buy this like big lighting setup. And I was talking to Slash Filmcast host David Chen. And he was like, Peter, do not buy that lighting setup. That's way too expensive. And I was like, what should I buy? And he was like, you should buy this lighting setup. So he suggested this other cheaper lighting setup. And the reason why he suggested this cheaper lighting setup was because he bought the exact setup that I bought. And he found out that he still owns it. But he was like, you can get what you need with this smaller setup, which he also bought. So he's recording his own YouTube videos. He's been taking a sabbatical of sorts from his main job. So if you want to check out his YouTube channel, I'll put that in the show notes. But he's been doing some film reviews and stuff, and they look beautiful. And I kind of have been asking him for his advice on this. So this past week we recorded this unboxing video because at Ordinary Adventures we have a P.O. box, and a lot of people send us like stuff, fan art, products, I don't know, all sorts of stuff. We unbox it, and I'm pretty happy with how the lighting setup got put together. So if you want to, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. I am, it's something that was way out of my wheelhouse. I don't know how to light things, but I think it looks very cinematic. So I'm kind of proud of myself. Okay, let's move on to what we've been reading. Ben, what have you been reading?
So it's taken me many months. I started this right before Halloween, but I finally finished reading Dracula. I've just been very bad about carving out time to read books, but I finally finished Dracula. I was like, there's no way I'm going to finish this before Halloween, but I want to read it during the month of October to sort of like try to get myself in that spooky mood, I guess. And I remembered that I think HT read this not too long ago, right? I remember you talking about it
last year. I loved it.
Yeah, I ended up really liking it too. I think it really like the pacing is it started out a little slow because I think a character basically just gets trapped in a castle for a little while, and I was kind of like, all right, where's this going? What's happening here? But once that I guess tiny subplot gets sort of resolved, the rest of the book really moves very well, and the whole thing is written out in a series of letters and diaries and things like that, and it sort of strains credulity when characters are like recounting conversations that they theoretically had hours before, and it's like word for word exactly what they what these people were saying. But if you can sort of jump past that little tiny logic leap, I had a lot of fun with this book. I thought it was really great. Jacob, I know you're a big fan of this too, right?
Yeah, some of my favorite books of all time, and the epistolary style where a novel is written as letters or diary entries is I love it to death. I think it's why I also love found footage horror. It's the idea that even when it strains, realism, it's the idea of the feeling that you found something that maybe you shouldn't be reading kind of lurks the back of your brain. I think Dracula just feels like that the entire way through.
Yeah, it does. Chris, I know you're obviously like a big horror guy. Have you ever read Dracula?
Oh yeah, many times. It's great. I like it more than Frankenstein, which I think is very boring to read, but Dracula is great.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like I think I've only seen maybe like the God, I'm trying to think. I have not seen that many Dracula adaptations. I know it's been adapted and there have been a ton of different versions and stuff like that, but it's just so crazy to think that this book was written in, the late 1800s, like almost 1897, it says. And it is so, like, there's so many, so much of the vampire lore that has just blended into all sorts of pop culture things, originated here, and it's so crazy to think about it that way. A lot of times when I go back and visit or revisit things that like spawned an entire genre, it kind of feels a little boring and a little a little rote, because we've seen those tropes recycled so many times in pop culture. But Dracula really does not feel that way at all. It feels like super fresh and just really like a totally compelling read most of the way through. So I was a big fan of it. I would recommend reading it if you are interested, and maybe you'll probably read it much faster than I did, since it took me 3 or 4 months or something to read, and it's not that long of a book.
Wow. You must have seen Francis Ford Coppola's 1992 film Bram Stoker's Dracula, right?
I did, but I was probably 14 or 15 when I saw it, and after reading this book, I really want to go back and revisit a lot of the Dracula sort of pop culture stuff that I have seen at a younger age, but now we'll be able to contextualize better having actually read the book. And I know there's like a new a Dracula series on Netflix right now that comes from Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, the guys who did
don't
Sherlock.
Watch that.
Okay. I was going to ask if any of you had seen it, because I'd heard, I think Jeff Kanata on a recent Slash Filmcast episode was saying that he really liked it a lot, but I had heard or sort of read some mixed headlines about it when I guess when the embargo lifted on that. I was wondering if any of you had actually watched it. Chris, it sounds like you have.
It's awful. Don't watch it.
No.
Yeah, what you'll soon discover, Ben, is that there's no such thing as a perfect Dracula adaptation. I mean, the Universal one from the 30s is good, but it's really based on the stage play adaptation, so it feels very stage-bound. Mm-hmm. And the Coppola version is a lot of fun, but it really is incredibly over the top and injects in a lot of stuff that's not from the book at all, despite having Bram Stoker in the title. So I've yet to see a Dracula adaptation that, for me, captures the real spirit of the book, and it feels more fresh to me for that reason than any of the films.
What is the best Dracula adaptation for you?
Oh, goodness. I don't know, because I honestly, I'd probably go closest to any of the Hammer films from the 50s with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Not because of good adaptations, they change the story a lot, but because I feel like the direct monstrous version of Dracula played by Christopher Lee and like the really intellectual, quiet Van Helsing played by Peter Cushing, for me, really reflect the tone of the book, even though the story doesn't.
Chris, for you, what is the best Dracula movie?
I don't know if it's the best, but my favorite is the Coppola one, which I love. It's so lush and gothic, and it's like one of the last movies to use like all practical in-camera effects. Like I can't think of another film after this that uses like 100% in-camera effects, and it does, it turns Dracula into sort of like a romantic figure, which he is not in the book. So on that level, it's not very faithful, but it is more faithful than most adaptations. Like it's one of the only films that has like an ending where people are, there's a cowboy riding a horse, and like that's all in the book, and they usually leave that out of the film. So while it takes a lot of liberties, it does feel the closest to the book, I think, to date.
Yeah, I was gonna say I remember like most Dracula adaptations, or my sort of foggy memory of them have been like the scope has been really, really limited. And this book, I was so surprised at how wide open it is. It really is not just like a stuffy castle sort of drama. It's much more like a cross-country adventure kind of thing with like this ragtag group of people, and it really like there's like boat stuff, and there's there are people who are like traversing cities and countrysides and all that, and I don't remember really seeing a lot of that huge scope in a lot of Dracula adaptations before. So
yeah, Quincy Morris, the American cowboy who fights Dracula with a Bowie knife, is the best Dracula character, and yet he's cut out of almost all the movies. It's crazy.
Oh, bummer.
Okay, let's move on to what we've been watching. It probably says something about the quality of movies that we're getting in theaters in February. Like this time of year is kind of like a wasteland, that we don't have much crossover here on today's podcast, or this week's podcast. But we do have one crossover thing, and this is a streaming movie. HT, you saw All the Boys, P.S. I Still Love You.
Yes. So I saw To All the Boys, P.S. I Still Love You. It's the sequel to All the Boys I Loved Before, which I found to be incredibly charming and delightful, despite some of its more shallow sort of tropes that it hits. But I really enjoyed To All the Boys, P.S. I Still Love You, because it kind of, it's one of the rare rom-coms that goes after the happily ever after and deals with the romantic lead's sort of insecurities. And while it doesn't really get any more realistic than the first one does, I think it's just incredibly charming and well shot, as well as having really great performances from its leads, Lana Condor and Noah Centineo, and newcomer to the film series, John Ambrose's actor, who I remember a lot, and I know who he is.
It's very obvious that you know exactly what this guy's name is.
Jordan Fisher. Exactly. It's definitely the equivalent of, a fluffy cake or a glass of light white wine, but it's really enjoyable. And, I always welcome return to rom-coms that are utterly sincere and excited about the genre and about love and teen interactions. So, I enjoyed it. To All the Boys.
And Ben, you also saw this?
I did. I was not as high on it as HT. I really liked the first movie. I thought that was really like a really surprising and I don't know, like a fluffy romantic comedy, but one that actually I don't know. It felt like what I want from a Netflix romantic comedy, and this one, it complicates the story a little bit, and I thought the pacing was it sort of dragged it. The movie's like an hour and 40 minutes, which is not very long, but it felt way longer than it was to me. I think by throwing those narrative complications in there, it sort of it tweaked the chemistry a little bit between Lana Condor and Noah Centineo, and it wasn't quite as charming of a movie overall because of that. And I appreciate that I understand that there's a trade-off there with like, it can't be all nice and, great chemistry if the characters are going through some interesting twists in their relationship. But I don't know, just on a pure enjoyment level, I like the first one a lot more. I think this one, the script wasn't quite there for me, and it felt more like, oh, is this more in line with what Netflix is doing with their romantic comedies? Like it felt more disposable, and Lana Condor is great, but I don't know. I was a little bit disappointed with this one, especially compared to the first.
Okay, well, I only saw one movie this past week. I saw Joe Carnahan's Boss Level. This is a movie that doesn't even have a release date yet. It might not even get a release. It might not get a theatrical release. It might not even end up on streaming services, and that's why it was screened thanks to a Collider screening Q&A thing. They Joe's basically trying to get word out about this film that it's not like a complete piece of crap, that like it should deserve a release. And this is one of those movies that was produced by MoviePass Films. It was actually kind of funny when the film plays, like it starts off with the MoviePass Films logo, and it got some chuckles from the crowd. And but it's a lot has been said about the failure of MoviePass and how not so great people ran that company. This film, I think when it was announced, was supposed to be a $45 million film. And I think like during production of this, they lost I want to say probably 75% of its funding during the production because of, the failure of MoviePass. So this movie, which is an action movie, this is it is a time loop action movie. So it's kind of like Edge of Tomorrow, Live, Die, Repeat, whatever you want to call it, where it is about this guy who's played by Frank Grillo, and he is experiencing the same day over and over again. There's some people out to kill him. His ex-wife has been killed the previous day, which he can't go back to. And he's trying to find a way to live past a certain time. And I think what's unique about this over like the Groundhog Day, time loop premise that we've lived with all these years is that this movie starts after our main character has already mastered the world. He's become a godlike figure where he knows where everything's going to, what's going to happen at every second. And he's kind of like figured most of the stuff out. Whereas usually like these kind of films, like it takes until like, the second to third, the back of half of the film, like for the person to like kind of gain that mastery of the world. And I think because of that, you lose some of the fun of us being along for the ride. It's kind of like we're always chasing after like what he already knows. But it's a fun film. It does seem like it was made for a lot less money than it should have been made for. But Joe Carnahan is good at that. Joe Carnahan, like, one of his first films, was his first film Narc? I think it was. It was made for like next to nothing. And it looked like a bigger Hollywood, lower level film. And, this movie, I'm not going to say this is a great movie. It's not like, oh my God, this is amazing. It needs a release, but this movie deserves a release. It was filmed in like 20 something days. And it's remarkable that a film, it feels so coherent and it like feels so big, for all the disaster that the production, incurred. Like I during the Q&A, Joe Carnahan was joking that the producers, which I assume he means the MoviePass people, their entire involvement was showing up on set one day to take photos from Mel Gibson, who plays the bad guy in this film. And that was the only time he ever heard or saw talked to them. So there's that. Boss Level, will it ever get a release? I don't know. It's very curious. It's I'm wondering if like maybe someone like Neon. Well, now Neon's been elevated. Like, Jacob, is Neon now outside of the like genre industry now that they've won all these like gold awards?
I think they've been out there for a few years now. I mean, they've been trying to find that big, breakout hit. They've been trying to find the indie movie that could, and I think Parasite definitely pushes them up. But they've been chasing, bigger success for a few years now, and I don't know if they want to touch movie with Mel Gibson in it because considering there's enough wrong with Boss Level with just Gibson's involvement makes it a tough sell for a company that wants to be classy like Neon.
Yeah. That's for sure. I mean, it's unfortunate because like Joe Carnahan seems like a good guy, and he's one of those guys who will tell you how it is. And Frank Grillo, I don't love him as an actor. He feels like he's always acting a little too hard. But this is not a film that deserves to be dumped on VOD and given like it feels like it needs to get something better of a release. But I don't know. We'll have to follow this and see what happens to Boss Level because it is very unfortunate. A lot of good people involved, even though there's some bad people like the MoviePass people and Mel Gibson. So okay, let's. I also saw the first double episode of Survivor: Winners at War. This is the 40th season of Survivor. And for this 40th season, every single contestant on the season is a winner of Survivor. And it's kind of like this big epic, like this is, the Avengers Infinity War of Survivor, if you want to put that up there. And it's interesting because they're also introducing some new mechanics to the game, these new tokens which people can win, and it's a new currency that they can use to buy idols and food and all sorts of stuff. It's really not gone into that far in the first episode, but it's interesting that when Survivor started, There was no immunity idols. There were, it was basically just the bare bones of the game. And like many of the board games that Jacob, you and I play, every few years the expansion gets released and some more rules get added to the game and make it a little bit more complicated, make it a little bit more, give it a little bit more depth. And I'm interested to see how these new tokens affect the game, but it's great to see like fan favorites back together on an island. There's some people that are on here that when they were on Survivor, there was no such thing as an iPhone. So, like, it's crazy how much the game has changed and seeing those players adapt. And the first 2 episodes are quite good. And it's also interesting, too, because these people have developed friendships off the show since the airing of the shows. So some of these people were on seasons with each other. Some of these people have developed friendships off the show in, the 20 years that have played out since then. Some of these people have like appeared together on like poker tournaments on TV and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of like relationships that are going into the show that you don't usually see in Survivor, and how that's affecting the show is very interesting. So if you're not into Survivor, I'm not sure if this is like the season to jump in. It's kind of like telling someone to be like, your first Marvel movie should be Avengers Endgame or whatever, Avengers Infinity War. But it is quite exciting, and I really enjoyed the first double episode.
Are you saying this is the Avengers Endgame of reality shows, Peter?
It is, and it's the first time in a reality show history that they upped the prize from $1 million to $2 million. So that's kind of an incredible prize for a reality TV show. But okay. Anyways, let's move on. Jacob, what have you been watching?
I caught up with Birds of Prey, which HT saw and already talked about, so I'll be brief here. I think Birds of Prey is really terrific. It's incredibly fun, incredibly stylish. It feels chaotic and out of control, but in a way that feels intentional. It feels like the chaos is harnessed to really represent Harley Quinn, played by Margot Robbie's state of mind. And it's just a really satisfying, good type of movie. It wears its influence on its sleeve, has this hard-hitting action, it's colorful. It is just, man, it is everything I think the Suicide Squad wanted to be. It is just this really fun, colorful, personality-driven action movie. And I'm a little disappointed that people haven't turned out as big of drove to see it. I really hope that picks up, word gets out. Birds of Prey is a lot of fun. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, I saw in 1917 Sam Mendes' new movie that was supposed to win Best Picture and did not when Parasite won. But I wouldn't have been mad if it did win. 1917 is very good and at times excellent. I run a little hot and cold with Mendes. He's made more movies that I like than I don't. But I think this movie is really outstanding. And the technical exercise part of it, the fact that it's made look like one shot, I think really works, and it works a lot better than something like The Revenant, where I feel like the cinematography is really calling attention to itself constantly. It really feels like it's saying, look at me, look at me, look at me, whereas 1917, cinematography really tells the story. The camera is always finding angles and positions to really place the characters in portraits that I think actually work and feel less showy and more about revealing the character and revealing the story in a way that is effective and feels like you're on a journey as opposed to being, a complete and total show off. And also George McKay, the lead actor in this, is outstanding. I look forward to seeing more from him. So yeah, that's all I've been seeing. Other than that, Peter, I've just been watching a lot of TV I've seen before while I do model painting. So right now I'm between major movie projects.
Yes. Ben, what have you been watching?
So I watched The Emperor's New Groove on Disney Plus. This is one of those movies that I guess that there's like a big support group for this, and I just missed it at the time. I never got around to seeing this. Came out in 2000. It stars David Spade and John Goodman. They do the voices for the lead characters. Eartha Kitt is in it as well. Patrick Warburton. I think Patrick Warburton's character, who is sort of like this goofy idiot, is sort of like the only redeeming quality of this entire movie for me. He's pretty amusing, but the rest of the film, man, I do not understand why anybody likes this movie. I think oh no, actually I heard a gasp. Did you grow up at a point where like this movie is like beloved to you?
Yeah, this came at like the perfect ample of time when I watched this movie, and I love it, and I still refer back to it every now and then. You're breaking my heart a little bit, Ben.
Oh, HT, this movie is so bad. It's so
No,
bad.
it's a good movie. It's funny. It's tongue in cheek, and it's definitely a little. The comedy I feel like wouldn't age well. I haven't seen it in a while, but it's so good and so funny. Whatever. You're wrong, Ben.
Oh no, HT. I did not find this funny almost in the least. I think Patrick Warburton's character is the only character who really made me crack a smile in the whole thing. David Spade and like, I understand that he's playing a character who's supposed to be unlikable, but it's so miserable to just like spend time with that guy who is like so self-centered. He plays like a I don't know, like a leader, like an emperor, I guess, of a nation who is just completely self-centered. And John Goodman's character is like this peasant who lives in a town who David Spade's character wants to like take over that town and replace it with like a giant pool or something, like a water park in his own image. And the movie is supposed to be about him like learning to be a better person, but it really is. Oh man, HT, I'm so sorry. This movie it's so trashy. It's like
I will say that it came at the time when Disney was trying to do something a little bit too self-aware and campy with its animated films. You see a little bit in Hercules, where it's very self-effacing and very sort of trying to go with modern referential humor. And I think The Emperor's New Groove really does have that like times 10. It's in the vein of what was coming out at the time, like Shrek, for example, and other DreamWorks films that were very just kind of thought themselves to be very funny and smug. I liked it. I thought it was great back then. I will say, if I revisit it now, it probably wouldn't be as good as I remembered, but I still have a great affection for that. And I think some of the bits are so funny. I think the lover bit was hilarious. So, yeah.
How old were you when you watched that, HJ?
Oh, I don't know. Well, maybe 8, 9.
Yeah.
It was the funniest thing to me when I was a kid.
In HT's defense, I watched this for the first time about a year ago, and I liked it. So
there you go.
I'll just say, I'll go ahead, Peter.
I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen this, Ben, which I'm guessing you probably haven't. There's a documentary called The Sweatbox, which is I don't think it's out in any official release, but you can find it on YouTube. And it's a 2002 documentary that was produced, I think it was directed by Sting's wife, who came on board because he was asked to, create the song for Kingdom of the Sun, which is the original movie of, which got turned into The Emperor's New Groove. And this movie called The Sweatbox kind of shows, the slow and painful transformation process of what happened to this film and the creative conflicts, and the Sweatbox named after the room where the animators would go into and basically show their like dailies of what they've created, and basically it was called the Sweatbox because the person showing their dailies would be like, it was this dark, dank room, and they'd be sweating their asses off. But I would highly recommend that because it kind of gives a perspective of how the movie was made. And it's one of those things that like would have never been made otherwise, other than it being directed by Sting's wife, who was associated with the film. Mm-hmm. And Disney's kind of tried to bury it, but you can be found on YouTube. So
that is really interesting, because I was going to say, as like a final note on this movie, the one thing that I was going to leave with was that it really feels like this movie got chopped up and like the script is all over the place. There's this chase scene that is really emblematic of what I'm talking about. So near the end of the movie, the lead characters are being chased by a couple of other supporting characters, and it turns into like a map scene, like Raiders of the Lost Ark or something, where there's like a dotted line where it follows the character's journey across the land that they're supposed to be going over. And it's so clear that they like ran out of money or just decided to, cut huge chunks out of the movie in order to get them back to this one location. And at the end of this chase montage, a character like these characters who are supposed to be, way far away at this point in the film, they show up unexpectedly, and one of the characters like stops and says, wait a second, how are they here? They were supposed to be, how did they beat us here? Because this map montage showed that they were way behind us at this point. And Patrick Warburton's character like pulls down a map. He stops the scene basically and pulls down a map and goes like, I don't know, by all accounts, there's no way that those characters should be here at this point. And the villain is just like, oh well, and then they move on from there. And I'm like, wait a second, you can't do that. What do you? No, I refuse to allow this. So
Ben, you're describing a very good scene in a very funny movie.
Jacob, no, you cannot possibly give this comedy points when it's so clearly a workaround, a production workaround.
It is a Disney movie working on Looney Tunes rules. I respect the hell out of that.
I don't respect a single thing about that movie. So anyway, let's move on to the other thing that I've been watching, which is Train to Busan, which is a movie I respect a lot more than The Emperor's New Groove. This movie came out in 2016. It's on Netflix right now. It's a zombie movie from South Korea. It is from director Yoon Sang-ho, and it stars Gong Yoo, Jung Yoo-mi, and Ma Dong-seok, who I thought was awesome in this movie. I don't remember if I've seen him in other things before, but he plays, for those of you who have seen Train to Busan, he plays like sort of the bigger guy who like tapes up his arms and he's constantly like punching zombies in the face. That description makes the movie sound dumber than it actually is. This movie I actually found to be a really, really emotional zombie film, like maybe the most emotional zombie film that I've ever seen, which I was not expecting. I knew it was going to be, sort of an action-packed, like a thrill ride kind of movie, because Train to Busan is like was one of the most successful South Korean movies at the time. It made a ton of money in theaters and was like this big international crossover hit. And it's been in my queue for a long time. I finally decided to check it out, largely because everybody after Parasite was talking about all these great South Korean movies, and there are so many that I have not seen. So I just wanted to sort of cross that one off my list. And part of me was wondering if it might feel a little bit like homework, but it could not be farther from the truth. This movie is just like so fun all the way through, but it's also kind of sad and really emotional at the end. So anyway, I would highly recommend it. Actually, Choi Woo-shik, who is in Parasite, he plays a supporting role in this movie too. So if you're a fan of Parasite, if that's like your first movie that you've seen from South Korea, maybe check out Train to Busan. I think we actually just published an article on slashfilm.com about other South Korean movies that you should check out too, so maybe we can link to that in the show notes.
This movie
I
is
also want to
so
note
good.
that it's amazing, and I also want to note that Ma Dong-seok, who is the heavy, who really is the breakout character and actor of this movie, will be appearing in the Eternals Marvel's film. So
nice.
Yeah,
Using his Americanized name Don Lee, but it is the same actor.
Cool.
Okay, Chris, what have you been watching?
I watched Brave, which is one of the few Pixar movies I hadn't seen, and since I have the free trial of Disney Plus right now, my wife and I.
What other Pixar movies have you not seen?
That's one of the few. I don't know.
Have you seen The Good Dinosaur?
I have seen that. I think I haven't seen A Bug's Life, actually. That's like the only one. And I haven't seen like the 10 Cars sequels. Yeah. So yeah, but beyond that, this was like the one I was most interested in seeing, basically. And it was fine. It's not like the best Pixar movie, but it's charming. It's well made. I liked it. So there you have it. Brave, an old movie. If you want to watch that, it's on Disney Plus. And I also watched The Pharmacist, which is a new Netflix true crime thing. And that was very good. It's very interesting because they sort of solve the crime in the first episode, and then the rest, there's like 3 more or 4 more episodes that makes the story sort of bigger than you thought it was going to be. It's about this pharmacist living in Louisiana, and his son gets killed while buying crack, and the cops don't really like care about it, because it's like, oh, who cares about this guy buying crack? So this pharmacist basically solves the crime on his own, and he finds the killer on his own after doing just like basic private detective work. And that all happens in the first episode, but then he starts, because he works as a pharmacist, he starts to see more and more people his son's age are coming into his pharmacy with really high doses of Oxycontin prescriptions. And he starts to get like, because his son died as a result of a crack epidemic, he starts getting like really suspicious, and he finds out there's this like really shady doctor in town who's just writing prescriptions for money for anyone who wants them, and he just sets out to basically stop this doctor. And it was very well done and very interesting, and it's not like your typical true crime thing, because like I said, they solved the quote unquote crime in the first episode, but it turns into like this much bigger all-encompassing thing, and tied into the opioid epidemic that's still going on in this country. So I recommend checking that out. It's on Netflix, The Pharmacist.
I did want to mention that I also did, you mentioned this true crime series, I did watch the second episode of McMillions on HBO. We talked about this last week. And this second episode, I'm not as enjoying as much as the first. It feels like they're really like stretching this out. Like, to give you an idea, the first episode leads up to the realization that there's this guy named Uncle Jerry who might be in charge of this whole scam to scam McDonald's out of, millions of dollars. And he's having his family win these prizes. Who is he? He might be part of this, the people that are running the campaign, the marketing campaign. And then the second episode is basically, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's this other Jerry. Who is the real Uncle Jerry? And like the whole episode is just like examining that, and it feels like it's kind of slowing down a bit. Ben, are you still watching this?
I am. I watched it and actually enjoyed the second episode, I think, a little bit more than the first one, just because that one FBI agent guy was not in it for the first half, and so I find him to be alternately obnoxious and enjoyable, maybe leaning a little bit more toward the obnoxious side. So the fact that he wasn't in it, and this episode sort of tied it into organized crime, and like the crime families and all that stuff, I found it to be a little bit more interesting than the first episode. But maybe that's because I've read the article and remembered some of the stuff from the first episode and didn't really recall a lot from the second episode, so it felt more fresh to me. But I guess your mileage may vary on that.
Yeah. I mean, I did think it was clever how they introduced, this is the guy that's probably Uncle Jerry, and then the second episode's like, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's this other guy. But it just felt like it should have been like maybe a half an hour, not like, what is it, an hour?
Yeah. And I think that probably the whole series, like each episode should be only half an hour or something, but yeah. Yeah.
Okay. HC, you are the only one here. You are the hero that we deserve. You went to the theater, you saw Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm seeing a mixed response online. I'm actually seeing some people I trust that say this is a great movie. And I'm also seeing some people I trust that say this is the worst movie they've seen this year. So, well, which is it?
They're both wrong. It's perfectly fine. I will say Sonic the Hedgehog, I actually went in anticipating kind of a disaster, but an enjoyable disaster, something that I could maybe could reach cult status and become something that you watch while incredibly high or drunk. It's not really that, and it's not really a great movie either. It just kind of is a perfectly fine movie that feels a little bit like a remnant of the late 90s, early 2000s kind of kids films that played with animated characters going into the real world. And as a result, it felt very hackneyed, especially the jokes, which seem to be written with a very much older audience in mind. I went to see it with a screening that was full of kids, and one thing that like I noticed was these kids in my screening laughed less than the kids during Dolittle, which I feel like is not a great sign for Sonic. But yeah, it's mostly fine, but it is elevated by a really terrific, elastic performance by Jim Carrey, who plays the film's villain, Dr. Robotnik, and he plays him almost like an evil Ace Ventura, very over the top, very loud and bombastic, and kind of the only one who seems to be aware of the campy film that Sonic should be. Everything else is played almost overtly sincere in a way that really doesn't jibe with the the jokes, the frequent jokes about Olive Garden, and I don't know why they made jokes about Olive Garden so much, and it almost felt like they were promoting it. And then other sort of timely jokes, like at one point they made a joke about Hillary's emails, and I was like, that's not going to age well. They're not aged at all well now.
Yeah, and kids like know all about that.
The kids obviously know about that, and about plutonium as well. And I was like, this is a very oddly written joke. And there's also various Vin Diesel Fast and Furious jokes, which just felt very like it was trying very hard to be smart and timely and relevant, and ended up failing on all counts. But yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog, it's not great. It's not terrible, but it's just like very mediocre.
I'm actually surprised to hear that Jim Carrey stuff like works, because in the trailers it was kind of cringeworthy for me, and it feels like I have like the impression that if like the Ace Ventura movie came out today, it would not like work in today's environment, like the over the topness. Like, do you think it works? Like,
I think it works. Yeah. You sound like you're not convinced, but it does. It's one of the few sort of real, genuinely fun elements of this film, which is about a character who can run really fast and yet spends the entire time in a car.
Why is he in a car if he can drive so fast?
Well, because he doesn't know the way to San Francisco, and he needs to be driven there for some reason by James Marsden.
Can't James Marsden just give him an iPhone or a map or
can't Sonic just run around the entire world real quick until he figures out where it is?
You would think so, but we have to have a buddy comedy, and poor James Marsden tries his best.
That's unfortunate. You saw one of my favorite movies from a couple years back, Fighting with My Family. This is a movie that I don't think a lot of people saw, but I'm not saying it's great, but I really enjoyed it. What did you think of Fighting with My Family?
That's a more recent film, isn't it? Didn't it just come out last year?
I think it was the year before last.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Am I right about that?
Oh, it's a 2019 film, apparently.
So okay, maybe I was wrong.
It feels like a long time.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it was at Sundance last year.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, I watched Fighting with My Family because it dropped on Hulu recently, and I have just been a big fan of Florence Pugh and the range that she's had, and was curious about this sort of small little British comedy drama about wrestling. I can't say that when the trailers hit or when I heard about this movie the first time around, I was very interested. I don't really have an interest in wrestling, but I enjoyed this movie. It's really charming. Florence Pugh is almost unrecognizable in this film, and it feels like this really scrappy and delightful little British film about a wrestling family, very tight-knit, and the two siblings who apply to be in the WWE, and only Paige, Florence Pugh's character, gets in, and she goes to try out in the competitive training program and ends up feeling really isolated and from her family and from her friends, and by the competitive, very shallow nature of the competition. But it's really great. I loved Florence Pugh in this film, and while I don't really have an interest or a knowledge of wrestling, I was able to follow the ins and outs of it really well. And yeah, it's just a charming, nice little film that took me by surprise.
And it's actually kind of sad because this wrestler Paige, after I saw this film, because I watched wrestling, but like way before any of this, and I did some research. I did some YouTubing on this wrestler Paige, and a year or two before this movie came out, she actually suffered an injury which basically caused her to have to retire from the business. So it's like there's this movie coming out celebrating you being the youngest champion in the title's history at age 21, and like her rise to popularity, and it came so shortly after it, but the movie was already in production. So it's kind of a sad story for her. Anyways, what else have you been watching?
I have been watching Rami, which is a comedy series on Hulu that I'm really enjoying. I remember hearing first about it when it won the Golden Globe for Best Actor. Rami Youssef, who helped create this series, won the award. And so I decided to check it out. And it's this really funny, sharp, incisive millennial comedy series that feels very much like a spiritual successor to Master of None, especially in the ways that it sort of deals with a young millennial immigrant or second generation immigrant who is kind of trying to reconcile his ties with his culture with his own sort of lifestyle. And it stars Rami Youssef as Rami Hassan, a first generation Egyptian American who is trying to get more in touch with his Islamic religion and be a more devout Muslim. But he finds that it starts to get in the way of how the sort of like casual sex and the sort of more slacker lifestyle that he's enjoyed up until now. And he finds that like the divide between the Muslim community and the community that he has grown up with is more polarizing than he anticipated, than he had thought of before. So it's a really well-written, really funny series that I really enjoyed. I especially recommend this if you like Master of None, Girls, other series that kind of tap into that millennial generational angst. And yeah, it's fantastic. And that's Rami on Hulu.
On Hulu. And Fighting With My Family did come out in February, so that it was so long ago. It was a year ago. I can barely remember it. Anyways, let's move on to what we've been eating. I this past week tried the cherry vanilla Coke Zero. This is a new flavor of Coke Zero. And, I have to try something because Brad is not here with us today. And I'm here to report that it basically tastes like a cherry cream soda, if that's possible. So if that sounds good to you, try the cherry vanilla Coke Zero. And that's in stores everywhere. I found it in Target. Let's move on to what we've been playing. This past week, I went to Disneyland and went on Rise of the Resistance. I actually got on, unlike the previous time where we showed up and tried to get a boarding group and had an epic fail. We recorded this video because Disney has released. They have an app that you can basically play in the park. It's called the Play app. It is basically supposed to like help your time in lines feel more fun. So there's like games you can play in lines. It's the app that turns into the data pad when you're in Galaxy's Edge, and you can hack things, you can translate things, you can do all that kind of stuff. But in the Rise of the Resistance, the ride, the new attraction at Disneyland and also Hollywood Studios and Disney World, there is a new game for that where basically when you're online, you can choose an affiliation. You can choose to be First Order, you can choose to be the Resistance. And I chose to be the Resistance, and Kitra chose to be the First Order. And while in line, she's like scanning certain packages, giving information to the First Order so that that later comes back. Like when you're in the ride, there's moments in the ride that you're like, oh, that happened because Kitra scanned this and alerted them of this. So it kind of feels like you're a part of the ride story. I was part of the Resistance, and I was helping Finn, who was on a First Order Star Destroyer. He was trying to, with his green team, he had lost his team, and he was there to delete some Resistance databanks off the Star Destroyer, some information they had on us. And I helped him like program some droids into like these droid units that like are attached to transports, and those are the transports that end up being the ride. So it ends up feeling like you are a part of what happens in the story, which is kind of cool. But it also means that like when you're in the line, instead of hanging out with your friends and chatting and having fun, you're on your phone like playing games and stuff. So you can see my whole video on that. I'll link that in the show notes. Jacob, what have you been playing this week?
I played the Arkham Horror card game, and this is a game of Fantasy Flight Games. They have the whole Arkham Horror line of games, which is all based on Lovecraft, weird fiction, cosmic horror stuff. And there's the main board game. There's a bunch of other different spin-offs and side games. And the card game is new-ish, it's a few years old. And it's part of their LCG system, Living Card Game, where there's no like booster packs of random cards. There are tons of expansions, but they're all, you know what you're getting in them. You can choose to buy what you want to buy. But what makes this one unique from other living card games is that it's fully cooperative. You play against the game. You and the other player, or me and my wife played this time. We can play up to 4 players. You pick your character, you build a deck around that character, and your deck is not just a bunch of cards. It's meant to represent you as a person, various skills, various items, various friends. And the main box comes with 3 scenarios. You can play as either individually or as a campaign. Campaigns recommended. You carry over your deck from scenario to scenario. You remove cards, you add new cards, and you essentially build your deck and advance your deck to become stronger to deal with each situation as you go ahead. And you buy more expansions, you get more more scenarios to play, more cards to add to your deck. And what's really fun is that there are negative cards. You can get negative cards to add to your deck. When you draw them, actually do bad stuff to you. So it's not just your deck becoming stronger, your deck becomes weaker as well. So it's about trying to balance your character and keep them alive and keep them strong, even as your deck starts getting flooded with stuff that's going to hurt you. And I found it really satisfying and really fun. It's a very, it's not like an entry-level co-op game like Pandemic is like, a much easier game if you want a game to play, casually. But someone who has played a lot of card games, likes this theme, and likes the idea of having an RPG element of carrying over a character from game to game and your deck being your character. I had a great time with this. That's the Arkham Horror card game.
Cool. Okay, that does it for today's Slash Film Daily. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find links to the things that we mentioned in today's episode in the show notes. That includes the videos I mentioned and the Sweatbox documentary that's on YouTube. This podcast is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Peter. Hey Peter.
Yeah, Jacob, Brad's not here today, so I don't think we have to do the the book thing.
Well, the thing is, since Brad's not here, I had to go into the past, Peter. I'd open a time tunnel, and I had to go look into all of your childhoods in order to find this round of insults from the gargantuan book of insult, offense, and effrontery, sharp retorts, riposts, caustic quips, and in-play put-downs by Louis A. Safian. So, I've opened this book to the juvenile delinquents section, and I found insults relevant to all of your childhoods.
I don't think I was a juvenile delinquent, but okay.
Peter, the only sure cure for kids like him is birth control.
Wow.
Ben, he's so tough, he's been turned down by every reform school in the country. HT, she's such a delinquent, she can go to reform school on a scholarship. Chris, he hangs out with such a tough neighborhood that a cat with a tail is considered a tourist.
These ones aren't even funny. I mean, not that they're normally funny, but like...
This is a special level of unfunny.
Yeah.
Well, Peter, you say you're a delinquent because when you were repressed as a child, your parents punished you, and when you sawed a cat in half, you gave his grandmother the hot foot.
Oh my god.
What the hell?
Wait. Let's rewind and dissect that one. What happened?
Like,
why did I saw
that cat?
Yeah, why did I
saw?
saw?
You're a delinquent because you were repressed as a child. Your parents punished you when you sawed the cat in half and gave his grandmother the hot foot.
I feel like the hot foot was like a peppy phrase that people used in like the 1950s, and we have no idea what it means, and that's the only way that you'd be able to make sense of this is if you knew what the hot foot meant. I don't know.
Yeah, this joke is like Sonic the Hedgehog in 50 years.
Peter says he's a delinquent because he was repressed as a child. His parents punished him when he sawed the cat in half and gave his grandmother the hot foot. Peter says he's a delinquent because he was repressed as a child.
Yeah.
Apparently, the hot foot is a prank where the prankster sets the victim's shoelaces or shoes on fire with a match or lighter.
Is that what it is?
Okay, all right. That sounds like a 1950s prank.
Peter says he's a delinquent because he was repressed as a child. His parents punished him when he sawed the cat in half and gave his grandmother the hot foot.
Peter, please end this.